Well, we're here for chapter 2 of my teacher Flunked the Planet. This chapter is called Long Division. Ew! Just kidding. Not really. Anyways, chapter 2, Long Division. Weird images seemed to crawl through my mind. Exploding television sets, vast sea creatures, things being cut in half, things being put together. I felt big. I felt tiny. I felt connected to something huge. I was swimming in an ocean that wasn't made of water, but of, I don't know, electricity maybe? Though that idea was too weird to hold on to. Ahead of me was a wall. I had to get past it. But how? Knock it down? Go under it? Swim right through it? I didn't know. I only knew that something terribly important was waiting on the other side. Before I could find a way past the wall, I heard Susan calling me. Duncan took my hand, and snap! I was out of the dream. The vision, whatever. Opening my eyes, I saw 4 faces, 2 human, 2 alien, staring at me with grave concern. "Peter, what happened?" asked Susan. I shook my head. "I don't know," I said, thinking how good it was to see her face. "What was that thing you said?" Duncan asked. "What did it mean?" I must have looked blank. "You know, the thing about Nika Nika Flexum Puspa?" Suddenly I remembered the words. Though they hadn't made sense when they first came out of my mouth, I understood them now. They were in the language of Hulan, the little blue alien who had become my teacher on board the ship. It was Hulan who had named me Krepta. I was very fond of him. I was also very sad when I thought of him, since he was now in a coma and no one knew for sure if he would live or not. Even worse, what had driven him into the coma was trying to make a telepathic link with my mind. "Well?" asked Duncan. "They mean approximately 1 for all and all for one," said Broxholm before I could answer. It was Duncan's turn to look confused. "That's the motto of the 3 Musketeers." I thought, I really do have to get used to the fact that Duncan knows things like that. Then I decided I could get used to it later. The first thing I decided to figure out was why I had been quoting a phrase from a French novel in an alien language. "Can you stand, Krupta?" asked Cleveland gently. I had known her only for a few hours. I was pleased to hear how kind her voice could be. "I think so," I said. "Is the boy all right?" asked Red Seaweed as Susan and Duncan helped me up. "I'm fine," I muttered, "just a little woozy." Actually, I wasn't sure how I was. Only I didn't say that, for a fear I would be taken off the mission. "I believe he needs some rest," said Broxholm. Considering what I had been through in the last 24 hours, this made sense. "He can relax in his room while the others receive their translators," said the purple alien. Duncan was looking more and more nervous. Finally, he turned to Creeblum and said, "Do you suppose I could take the poot with me?" Creeblum paused, then pulled the glowing jelly-like blob from her shoulder. "Poot," it said, sticking out a couple of eye stalks. Creeblum looked at Duncan. "You really do like poot, don't you?" Duncan nodded. Creeblum seemed to be thinking. At last, she grasped the slug firmly in both hands. Then she yanked her arm sideways, pulling the poot like a piece of taffy. "Stop!" screamed Duncan. The poot stretched until it was about 3 feet long. "Poot!" it cried. "Poot!" Then it snapped in half. "What did you do that for?" asked Duncan, his voice quavering. "I thought you might like a poot of your own," said Creeblum. She sounded puzzled by Duncan's reaction. Duncan blinked. Each of Creeblum's outstretched hands held a poot identical to the one she had pulled off her shoulder, but only half the size. Was one poot the parent and one the child, or were they both the same poot, now living in 2 bodies? It was very confusing. Duncan was pale. "Did you hurt it?" he asked, his voice trembling. "There's an airplane. We live sort of near an airport. Happens all the time. Not badly," said Creeblum, "but the extension of life always involves some pain. Pick one." "Pain or life? Pain or life?" asked Duncan, sounding confused. "No, pick a poot," she replied, exasperated. Duncan hesitated, then reached forward and took the small poot that lay quivering quivering in Creeblem's left hand. "Thank you," he said in a voice that sounded like he was far from certain whether he meant it. "You are most welcome." Duncan lifted the poot to his shoulder. After a moment, it stretched a blob of itself, patted him on the cheek, and said, "Poot." Duncan smiled and seemed to relax a bit. "Time to go," said Broxholm as he programmed... Oh, no, not like that. "Time to go," said Broxholm as he programmed the transcendental elevator to take Susan and Duncan to Croc Dock. I was very fond of Croc Dock, despite the fact that he once took out my brain to examine it, so I went along to say hello. Susan and Duncan... My lips are super chapped. Susan and Duncan flinched as we entered the room. I couldn't blame them. Croc Dock was nearly 7 feet tall and looked like a human version of a red crocodile. "Don't worry," I whispered to Susan. "He's a very good being." She nodded, but didn't relax. "Greetings, Crypta," said Croc Dock, displaying his teeth. "May the wisdom of the egg be with you." "Greetings, fixer of bodies," I replied, touching my forehead in a gesture of respect. Then I translated for him as he asked Susan and Duncan to climb onto his operating tables. "I'll see you guys later," I said once they were settled. Leaning close to Susan, I added in a whisper, "Don't worry." Then I turned to Duncan. "Have fun," I said cheerfully. Duncan squeezed his poot, which was still clinging to his shoulder. I felt a brief wave of dizziness. I knew I should go to my room to rest, but I decided to visit Hulan instead. I had 2 reasons for this. First, I was terrified that he might die before we finished our mission. If so, this would be the last chance I would ever have to see him. Second, even though he was in a coma, I suspected he was somehow connected to what had happened to me in the council chamber. I took out my U-Rat, which Hulan had given to me the day I met him. A U-Rat, Universal Reader and Translator, is like a pocket computer, but with more information plugged into it than you can begin to imagine. Flipping it open, I requested the code for Hulan's room. The screen displayed a pattern of colors. I punched the pattern into the keypad of Croc Dock's transcendental elevator. When the elevator was ready, I stepped through the wall. Hold on. When was this copyrighted? 1992. So this was before iPhones and stuff. iPhones now are kind of like U-Rats. Like when it says it's like a pocket computer but with more information plugged into it than you can begin to imagine. It's a phone. It's what it's like. They couldn't imagine in this time a phone, an iPhone, with a literal touch screen and the web in this big of a thing. Because, you know, they had like big boxy computers. Anyways, kind of cool to think about how they didn't know what was coming back in 1992. Flipping it open, I requested the code for Hulan's room. The screen displayed a pattern of colors. I punched the pattern into the keypad of Croc Dock's transcendental elevator. When the elevator was ready, I stepped through the wall. My teacher's little blue body was floating in the center of a nearly invisible bubble. The bubble was a fancy version of the force fields. The force fields Broxholm and Creeblen had used to imprison Miss Schwartz and Duncan. I call it fancy because it was keeping track of everything from Hulan's temperature to the electrical activity in his brain. Walking to the bubble, I stared through its clear, curved side. It was strange to see Hulan, who was one of the liveliest beings I had ever met, lying so still and quiet. His thick white mustache drooped limply beneath his big nose. He was glowing, as he had been when he fell into the coma, but the glow was so faint it could barely be seen. I kept thinking of a dying firefly. I asked the U-Rat a question. When it gave me the okay, I placed my hands against the bubble. Nothing. No sense of communication, as Susan and I had felt when we touched the force field that held Miss Schwartz. But maybe that was good, considering what had put Hulan here to begin with. What is so awful about the human brain that it could do this to him? I wondered. I leaned my head against the bubble, trying not to cry. To my surprise, Hulan opened one eye. Opened it, then closed it, very slowly. That was all. It took me weeks to figure out what he had just done. What? That's the end? Well, that's the end of chapter 2. It's a little bit of a cliffhanger. Is Hulan alive? Guess we'll just have to find out in the next chapter, which I don't know if I have time for. But probably tomorrow. Or today. I don't know. We'll see. Like and subscribe.